trust God. My brothers and sisters, there comes a time in our lives where it seems as if God is not there. Though even when our flesh don't know God's presence, our spirit testifies to tell us to trust God anyhow. James Fortune and Fire sings a song that says, regardless of my situation, God, I'll trust you. Even when my head is low and I feel like I have no place to go, God, I'll trust you. As I listened to this song, God took me to our text today where we find the disciples struggling with trusting and knowing Jesus because they are still unable to determine just what kind of Messiah he is. Let me tell you that the reason they are feeling this way is because the Messiah they want has not come. But the Messiah they need, they cannot recognize it yet. Here in chapter 6, we find Jesus and his disciples were about to go over to the other side of the sea until a great multitude of people came running to Jesus. In the text, they came running, and the Bible says when Jesus saw them, he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep with no shepherd. So he teaches them and feeds them. Over 5,000 were fed that day, and that's not even counting the women and children who were there. Though it is after this event, Jesus tells his disciples to get into the boat and meet him on the other side. And someone is here today, and you've just seen God do some great things in the lives of people. But now Jesus tells you to get into the boat and leave. We have a problem here because he is the navigator of our lives. And how can I trust God when he tells me to go on without him? And my brothers and sisters, here we are. If we're going to trust God, we first have to trust God's direction for our lives. If we're going to trust God, we have to trust God's directions for our life. It's in verse 45 right here. It says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethesda, while he sent the multitude away. Understand that Jesus sends them away to meet him on the other side. Now, you ask me why, and that's a pretty good reason to ask me why. Because if the disciples would have stayed after feeding the 5,000, then they would have missed the lesson Jesus wanted to teach them to really get, which was to see Jesus for who he really was, and not by only what he can do. And many times God tells us to leave certain places for the lesson of getting to know who he really is. But we stay where we are because we are comfortable in knowing Jesus just as a prosperity messenger who only gives. But I stopped by here to tell somebody that the reason why God is directing you away from things and people is because he's trying to get you to see who he really is to you. Not based upon his presence he gives you, but based upon his atmospheric presence with you. And if we're going to trust the direction that God has for our lives, then we have to stop looking into our hands and start looking into a relationship. Because if we have the relationship first, the blessing will follow. So stop looking in your hands for God's directions and trust God's directions on your relationship. But how can you have a relationship with God if he don't even know you? Tell your neighbor, it's easier to trust the direction God has for your life when God gives you everything you desire. Though if we're going to trust God, second, we have to trust the eyes that God's eyes are still on us. That God's eyes are still on us. This is verse 46 through 48a. It reads like this. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straying and rowing, for the wind was against them. After Jesus sends them away, he goes to the mountain and pray. Now, Deacon, my question is, why would Jesus go and pray after feeding 5,000? We would think he would be too exhausted, but when we look back at verse 30, we see that Jesus had compassion on them. So his prayer to God could have been like this: God, I thank you for providing. His prayer could have been, Father, I just want to thank you again. For whatever the reason he prayed is not mentioned, but the point is he prayed before moving on. Let me pause right now to say that God's eyes are always on us whenever we call upon his name. Anytime God has blessed us to become a blessing for someone else, we should not mind going to God and telling him, thank you. Because his eyes are always on us. And if he sees that we are humble enough and thanking him for allowing us to bless others, then he'll continue to bless us because we put him first in our giving. I believe that not only thank God in prayer for the blessing he allows us to do for others, but we also see that Jesus gives us a great example of how important a prayer life is with God. That's why we should build our prayer life not by seeking God just to give, but by seeking God to be God all around. Though while Jesus is on the mountaintop praying, the disciples are rowing in the sea. And many theologians would suggest that Jesus was praying and watching his disciples at the same time while on the mountain. The Bible tells us that while they were rowing, Jesus looked down on them while he was on the mountain praying. And that's good news because it shows us that Jesus is always concerned about what's going on in our lives. Yet, here it is, my brothers and sisters, that we see the disciples coming against a great storm. Now they find themselves in what seemed to be a smooth sailing trip to what has now become a panic desperation for survival. But what they don't know and can't see is that Jesus is still sees them in their storms, which causes us to know that regardless of how hectic our storms may rage, God still sees us through our storms. So how is that? How is that? Because David declared in Psalms 34:15, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are open to their cry. I need to say that again. Psalms 34:15, David says the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are open to their cry. So the question is, how can we trust God when the storms are raging in our lives? And lastly, here it is. If you're going to trust God, lastly, you have to trust God's hands of protection. Trust God's hands of protection. It's right here, verse 48 through 50. Then he saw them straining their rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, be of good cheer, it is I. Now here they are, right at what would seem to be the point of death. I mean, they are so afraid that when Jesus comes walking on the water, they act as if he is a ghost. Have you ever been in a situation when all hell is breaking loose and it seems like you're not going to get out, but all of a sudden you felt a still calm peace come over your soul, and God says everything is going to be all right. Jesus comes on the scene and said, do not fear, it is I. And somebody needs to tell your neighbor, I know it's hectic. Neighbor, I know it's crazy, but do not fear, it is he. God has not given us the spirit of fear. But wait a minute, can't you see them straying and rowing and straying, all for the effort to get out of the storm that they're going in? I can imagine how they're losing strength because it seems that the more they row, the harder the wind blows. That's just like life. It seems like the more you row, the more things seems out of control. The more you do your best, the more things seems to get out of control. The more you dot every I and cross every T, the more things seems to get out of control. But wait a minute, some of us are right now rowing on our jobs, rowing in our marriages, rowing in our homes, and the winds are getting stronger, and you're at the breaking point, but don't break because Jesus is there walking on the water. But here it is. Even though you may seem to be at your breaking point, don't break. It's not over. It's only the beginning. And I came to tell somebody, Jesus has come to keep his hand of protection upon you. Well, you're looking at me pretty funny because I guess you're trying to figure out what is the hand of protection. Well, that's a good question. It's right here in the text. As you understand, they're in a storm. The water is not getting into the boat. The boat is not tearing apart. Why? It's because God's hands of protection is on them. So even though you may be rolling and straying, you're not being torn apart. God is still keeping you together. Somebody's in a storm right now and you're wondering, how am I keeping it all together? It's because God's hand of protection is on you. Oh, God, help your boy. And so every now and then you need to learn how to continue to call on the name of Jesus. I never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread, his hand of protection. Oh, I got to get out of here. Oh, do I have a witness in this place? Moses said, I had Pharaoh behind me and the Red Sea in front of me, and I didn't know what I would do, but God said, stretch out my rod. And when I stretched out my rod, God opened up the sea, and we all went to the other side. But then Daniel came and gave me another witness. He said, don't you know the king threw me in the lion's den, and he thought that I would die, but next thing I know, I went to sleep on some platted lions and woke up the next day and said, oh, king, live forever. And I just stopped by here to tell somebody that even though you may be weeping, in the night, but get ready for your joy that's coming in the morning. God is up to something. God has not forgotten you. You better get ready, baby, because God is about to do something in you. Oh, Lord, I don't know about you, but I ain't got time to hold my head down. I ain't got time for Negroes to get on my boat. Baby, if you ain't for me, then you all against me. But if God be for me, who can be against me? I never. Ain't the Lord all right? Ain't the Lord all right? I should have been dead, sleeping in my grave, but guess what, baby Baba? I'm still alive. It's something about when you think about Jesus and all that he's done for you, you've learned how to stay connected to the right source. So all you need to do is trust God. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, trust God. You don't need to see him. You don't need to know that he's there. But just know by faith, we walk by sight. Now we walk with faith. And that's all that's good enough for me, because I can trust God every day of my life. I'm going to trust him till he calls me home. I'm going to trust him while I still got breath in my body. Ain't the Lord all right? Ain't the Lord all right? I don't know about you, but I'd rather have Jesus than silver and gold. I tried him and I know him to be true. I checked his credit, y'all. His credit is good with me. How do you know his credit is good? Because he's been a bridge over troubled water. He's been food on my table. He's been clothes on my back. He's been a roof over my head. He's been a doctor in the sick room. He's been a lawyer in the courtroom. Ain't he all right? Ain't he all right? Ain't he all right? Ain't he all right? I'm gonna trust him even when my friends turn against me. I'm gonna trust him even when my loved ones is gonna be with him. I'm gonna trust him because everything is gonna be all right. Everything is gonna be all right. Do you feel like I feel? Do you feel like I feel? Do you feel like I feel? Well, how do you feel? I got a feeling that everything is gonna be all right. I'm not gonna wait till the year's over, but I'm gonna shout right now. I'm gonna glory right now. Say yeah, say yeah, yeah.